I want you to close your eyes for a second and just do a little mental exercise with me.
Okay, I am Dame.
I want you to completely erase the room you're sitting in right now. Like, just wipe it from your mind. Erase the ambient hum of your refrigerator, the warmth of the central heating, the electric light overhead.
Right, strip all the comfort away.
Exactly. Erase the solid, unyielding ground beneath your feet. Replace that perfectly level floor with slanted, perpetually damp, rotting oak.
Oh, that is a visceral image.
And you are thousands of miles from anything resembling a human settlement. You have been plunging into the freezing, storm-lashed darkness off the coast of Africa, down near the Cape of Good Hope, for weeks.
Which is notoriously one of the most violent stretches of water on the planet.
It really is. The isolation out here, it isn't just a fleeting emotion. It is an absolute suffocating physical reality. You are surrounded by a colossal, roaring black void. The salt spray feels like crushed glass against your face.
Yeah, that freezing spray that just numbs the skin completely.
And the hurricane winds are tearing through the hemp rigging above you with a frequency that genuinely mimics human screaming.
That high-pitched shriek of the wind through the ropes.
Right. You are exhausted, you are malnourished, and you are terrified. And then you look out into the abyss and you see it.
Emerging directly out of the squall.
Yes, through the violent, churning fog, this strange, unnatural red light begins to bleed into the darkness. It completely defies the blackness of the storm. Nothing should be out there.
Absolutely nothing.
But the light coalesces. It takes shape, pulling matter right out of the mist. Suddenly, right off your bow, a ship appears. But this ship, it breaks every single physical law of navigation you understand.
It is doing the impossible.
Right. Its sails are fully billowed, taut as drums, and yet it is gliding completely silently, cutting directly against the hurricane force winds.
Completely ignoring the physics of the storm.
Exactly. It is entirely unaffected by the mountainous waves that are currently tearing your own vessel apart at the seams.
It represents, the ultimate manifestation of oceanic dread. It is an image that haunted the collective psyche of mariners for generations.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today, our mission is an investigative, really chilling exploration into the most infamous phantom vessel in human history, the Flying Dutchman.
We really need to set our parameters immediately here.
Yes, we do. We are tossing out the cartoonish fairy tales, the theme park rides, all of that.
Yeah.
We are approaching this as a very real, documented psychological horror.
Right, because this was an experience. It was a visceral terror that actual seasoned sailors documented. They feared it, and in some cases, they died believing in it.
The stack of evidence we have compiled for this investigation is, frankly, formidable. We are not just looking at spooky stories.
No, not at all. We are pulling from centuries of maritime logs, primarily originating from the golden age of the Dutch East India Company. We will examine personal journals from the late 18th century and dissect scientific treatises on the mind-bending physics of atmospheric optical illusions.
And we are going to break down a highly documented, officially recorded royal eyewitness account from the late 19th century that ends in absolute, undeniable tragedy.
The thread tying all these disparate sources together is the sheer, terrifying vulnerability of humanity.
That is the core of it, really. We are exploring what happens to the human mind when it is forced to confront the colossal, unforgiving power of the ocean.
What happens when isolation, sleep deprivation, and absolute dread begin to manifest literal nightmares in the waking world?
So, to really comprehend the genesis of the Flying Dutchman, we have to place ourselves in the environment that birthed it.
We have to go back to the 17th century. The ocean in that era was, quite literally, a graveyard of empires.
Yeah, this era was defined by the golden age of the Dutch East India Company, or the VOC, which was founded in 1602.
Right, and people today hear company and they think of, a modern corporation, but that is wildly inaccurate.
I've always pictured the VOC as just a massive fleet of merchant ships moving spices around. But looking at these historical records, that feels like a massive understatement.
Oh, calling them a business barely scratches the surface. They weren't just a business. They functioned more like a shadow government.
It's a shadow government with its own navy.
Exactly. The sources detail how the VOC was essentially the world's first multinational joint stock limited liability corporation. But they were heavily armed.
Which is terrifying when you think about corporate power.
They were a government-backed trading cartel that possessed their own military fleets. They had the authority to wage wars, execute prisoners, negotiate treaties, and even strike their own coinage.
They were printing their own money.
Yes. They mobilized massive financial resources through public stock, operating at a scale previously reserved only for absolute monarchs. They dominated global trade by combining cutting-edge ship technology with a deeply aggressive, often ruthless corporate mandate.
Which means the pressure on a captain wasn't just to deliver nutmeg or cinnamon. It was a corporate and military imperative.
Failure wasn't really an option.
Right. Failure meant financial ruin, or worse. But that dominance, that immense wealth flowing back to Amsterdam, it was paid for in blood and salt water.
The human toll is staggering when you actually look at the numbers.
Let's paint a picture of the workplace environment for an average sailor during this era. Because you have no GPS, you have no satellite weather tracking, you have no radio.
No life rafts, really, in the modern sense.
None of it. If a storm breaks your mast, there is no Coast Guard coming to winch you to safety. You are entirely on your own.
You are trapped with maybe a few dozen other men in a wooden box that is actively rotting beneath you.
Surrounded by an environment that routinely swallows entire armadas without a trace. Imagine going to work every day knowing the environment itself wants to kill you.
It was a daily crucible of human endurance. I mean, sailors battled scurvy, starvation, hypothermia, and rampant infectious diseases.
And let's talk about scurvy for a second, because it is not just you get a little weak.
Not at all. Scurvy alone doesn't just cause your gums to bleed. Severe vitamin C deficiency leads to profound depression, emotional lability, and vivid hallucinations.
Wait, really? Hallucinations from scurvy?
Yes, your brain chemistry is literally unraveling from malnutrition. So you are taking men in this state, placing them in a sensory deprivation chamber of fog and darkness on the open ocean, and subjecting them to constant mortal terror.
And it is out of that specific crucible, that intersection of intense corporate pressure and profound physiological suffering, that the Dutchman is born.
That is the breeding ground for the nightmare.
The early lore points to the Dutchman being a specific type of ship, a fluid.
Right, Fluit.
Yeah, this wasn't a sleek warship. It was a 17th century Dutch cargo vessel designed specifically for maximum space and efficiency.
The Fluit was actually a marvel of naval engineering for its time. It featured this distinctive pear-shaped cross-section.
So it bulged out at the bottom.
Yes, to maximize cargo capacity while paying fewer taxes, because tolls were often based on the width of the main deck. And it had a specialized rigging system that allowed this massive ship to be sailed by a surprisingly small crew.
Which is great for the VOC's bottom line.
Exactly. This maximized profit margins for the VOC, but it meant the crews were chronically overworked, perpetually exhausted, and stretched to their absolute physical limits.
A grueling workhorse of the sea. But the horror of the Flying Dutchman lore doesn't really focus on the ship's architecture.
No, the ship itself is just the vessel. The terror lies in its curse.
The core legend describes a ship doomed to never make port. It is eternally locked out of sanctuary.
Cursed to sail the oceans forever, glowing with that ghostly, unnatural light.
And in maritime superstition, merely spotting this phantom was a catastrophic portent.
Just seeing it meant you were doomed.
Right. The vessel was believed to drag foul weather with it, bringing tempests and death to anyone unfortunate enough to cross its wake.
But there is a specific, really macabre detail in the earliest iterations of the mythos that elevates it from a standard ghost story into something deeply unsettling.
I know exactly what you're going to say, and it is so creepy.
According to the lore, if the Dutchman hails another ship in the fog, the spectral crew doesn't open fire with cannons. They don't attack you.
No, they do something much weirder.
They lower a boat, row over, and attempt to hand off mail. They desperately try to send letters back to land.
I read that in the sources, and it literally stopped me cold. Because the letters are addressed to people who have been dead for centuries.
It is such a specific, tragic detail.
Think about the psychological weight of that.
Yeah.
You are out on the ocean, and this ghost crew just wants you to deliver their mail. It is the maritime equivalent of getting a desperate, static-filled voicemail in the middle of the night from a number that was disconnected 100 years ago.
With the caller begging you to deliver a message to a street address that no longer exists.
Exactly. It is profoundly sad, but also terrifying.
The psychological resonance of that specific detail is brilliant, honestly. It taps into a universal human fear of unresolved trauma.
The idea that you can't ever go home.
Right. The dead are reaching out to the living not for vengeance, but out of a desperate, eternal yearning for closure that they are metaphysically barred from ever achieving.
And the legend warned that if a living sailor pitied them enough to accept those letters, severe misfortune, usually a fatal shipwreck, would immediately follow.
You cannot accept the burden of the dead.
I want to push back on the supernatural element for a second, though, because if we look at this from a purely historical survival standpoint, what if these initial encounters weren't ghosts at all?
You mean a physical explanation for the mail handoff?
Yeah. What if a ship pulls up in the fog, its crew pale and emaciated,
Ah.
begging to hand off letters? Couldn't that just be a plague ship?
Oh, wow. That is a grim thought.
A real vessel struck by cholera or yellow fever, denied entry to every port, doomed to sail until the crew died, desperately trying to get their final letters home before they succumb.
Because no port would let them dock.
Right. The dead for centuries detail might just be a later mythological embellishment grafted onto a very real, waking horror. The horror of running into a dying crew.
That is a highly credible historical theory. Quarantine at sea back then was basically a death sentence. A ship stricken with a highly contagious disease would be fired upon by fort cannons if it tried to dock.
They would literally shoot at you to keep you away.
Yes, the crew would be forced back out into the open water to slowly die. So the sight of a decaying ship, manned by the dying, drifting aimlessly, would absolutely seed the foundation for a ghost ship myth.
The terror of contagion morphs into the terror of a curse.
Over decades of retelling, the plague ship becomes the phantom ship.
So how does this trauma evolve from whispered rumors in the dark holes of plague-fearing ships into the concrete, documented legend we know today? We need to trace the chronological reconstruction of this horror.
We do. And the oldest known extant print version of the legend provides a really fascinating starting point.
It doesn't appear in print until 1790, right?
Correct. 1790, in a book by John MacDonald titled Travels in Various Parts of Europe, Asia, and Africa, MacDonald records an incredibly casual yet deeply tragic detail.
What does he write?
He writes, quote, "The weather was so stormy that the sailors said they saw the Flying Dutchman. The common story is that this Dutchman came to the Cape in distress of weather and wanted to get into harbor but could not get a pilot to conduct her and was lost, and that ever since, in very bad weather, her vision appears."
I am struck by the total lack of malice in MacDonald's account. Like, there is no evil here.
No, it's just pure misfortune.
This isn't a demon ship hunting the living. It's an echo of a tragedy. It's a ship in distress, battered by the Agulhas current, desperate for the safety of a harbor.
They just needed a local pilot to show them the safe path through the rocks.
Right. They can likely see the lights of the port, they can smell the land, but the storm is too violent, and they can't get that pilot to guide them through the treacherous shoals. They're locked out of survival at the very last second.
The psychological horror there is the denial of sanctuary. It is the agony of perishing inches from safety. You can practically see your salvation, but you are barred from it.
But as we move forward through the historical record, that sympathetic tragedy begins to curdle into active paranoia. The story gets much darker.
It does. We see this explicitly in 1795, just 5 years later, in an account attributed to George Barrington in A Voyage to Botany Bay.
This is a really intense account.
Barrington details the harrowing story of a Dutch man-of-war lost with every soul on board off the Cape of Good Hope. Crucially, though, her consort ship, the vessel traveling alongside her, managed to weather the storm and survive.
Okay, I want you to really place yourself on that surviving ship.
Yeah.
You have just spent 48 hours fighting the rigging, deafened by the wind.
Completely exhausted.
And you are watching the ship next to you carrying your friends, your countrymen get swallowed by the ocean. You can't do anything to help them.
I just have to watch them drown.
Right, so you make it to port, you repair your shattered masts, and then months later, your orders dictate that you have to sail right back through the exact same latitude.
Right back over the graves of your friends.
Yes. You have to sail over the watery graves of the people you watched die. The PTSD would be absolutely suffocating.
Barrington's text captures that trauma perfectly. He writes that upon returning to that latitude, they were assailed by another violent tempest in the dead of night.
Of course they were.
And through the squall, the crew saw, or fiercely believed, they saw a vessel standing for them under oppressive sail.
Coming right at them.
Yes, it appeared to be deliberately trying to run them down in the darkness. One sailor was absolutely adamant, screaming over the wind that it was the exact ship that had foundered in the previous gale.
He recognized it.
He believed the apparition of their dead comrades had returned to sink them.
It is the ultimate survivor's guilt manifesting as a physical attacker. Your brain is telling you you survived, they didn't. Now they are coming for revenge.
But the text notes that the weather cleared and the object turned out to be just a dark, thick cloud.
So the ghost was just an illusion.
The physical ship was an illusion, yes. But the psychological damage was permanent.
The fear was real.
Very real. Barrington notes that discovering it was a cloud did absolutely nothing to erase the terror from the minds of the sailors. When they arrived in port, the story spread, quote, like wildfire, causing an absolute infatuation among English seamen who absorbed the superstition from the Dutch.
We really need to analyze the mechanics of that word, infatuation, because if you put 80 severely traumatized, sleep-deprived men in a claustrophobic wooden box for 6 months, you are creating a literal pressure cooker for mass psychogenic illness.
It is the perfect environment for shared delusions.
If one respected sailor during a terrifying night watch suffers a mental break and starts screaming that a cloud is a ghost ship, that panic is a literal contagion. It overwrites the rational brains of everyone around him.
Right, pareidolia, the tendency to see faces or objects in random patterns, becomes weaponized by collective fear. You see what you are most afraid of.
The environment forces the brain to fill in the gaps of sensory deprivation with its deepest fears.
And as a story spreads from ship to ship, across decades, the psychological nature of the myth mutates. It darkens significantly.
It stops being just about a storm.
By the early 19th century, it shifts from a story about bad weather and tragic loss into a narrative of eternal punishment and profound moral failing.
The narrative introduces the concept of a grand sin. The crew did something to deserve this.
Precisely. In 1803, John Leyden publishes Scenes of Infancy. Leyden describes the specter ship ushering in hurricanes off the coast of Africa, but he introduces a chilling new rationale for their wandering.
What is his rationale?
He claims the crew was supposed to have been guilty of some dreadful crime in the infancy of navigation. As a result, they were stricken with pestilence and ordained to traverse the ocean until the period of their penance expired.
So it is no longer just a ship that missed the harbor because of a storm. It is a floating, eternal prison.
It is divine retribution.
But the sources present conflicting accounts of what that dreadful crime actually was, right?
Yes. The historical context here is very grim. In 1812, Sir Walter Scott, expanding on Leyden's work, claimed the ship was originally a vessel laden with immense wealth and that a horrid act of murder and piracy had been committed on board.
So Scott frames it as a tale of greed and bloodshed, a mutiny or piracy.
Right. However, the sources indicate that Leyden's original claim was far more grounded in the systemic horrors of the era. Leyden originally named their crime not as piracy, but as being the first ship to bring enslaved people from Africa.
Oh, wow. That reframes the entire mythos.
It changes the weight of the curse completely.
If this legend evolved organically from the minds of actual sailors, we are looking at an incredible projection of collective morality and survivor's guilt.
Because these sailors were the cogs in the machine of the transatlantic slave trade.
Exactly. They were witnessing and directly participating in unimaginable human suffering. The conditions on those ships for enslaved people were waking nightmares.
Horrors that would absolutely break a person's conscience.
Is it possible they felt, on some deep subconscious level, that the maritime industry actually deserved to be damned? That they were projecting the waking horror of the slave trade onto a supernatural punishment?
The ocean becomes a vast mirror for the darkest aspects of the human soul. They are processing the atrocities of their era by punishing themselves through their own folklore.
They construct a phantom vessel to carry the weight of a sin too massive for any single crew to bear.
That is a brilliant way to put it. They externalize the guilt.
So if the ship is carrying the ultimate sin, who is standing at the helm? Who takes the blame? The sources give us a couple of real-life suspects who are drafted into the role of the damned captain.
Yes, the folklore initially attached itself to a 17th century Dutch captain named Bernard Folk.
And Folk was a real guy, right?
Folk was a historically real individual, but his reputation was built entirely on impossible speed. His voyages from the Netherlands to Java were so unnaturally fast for the navigational limitations of the era that genuine rumors circulated claiming he had forged a pact with the devil.
Because people just couldn't understand how he was doing it.
Right. He used some unknown route or had a brilliant understanding of the trade winds, and the only way his contemporaries could process his genius was to accuse him of demonic collusion.
It was the 17th century equivalent of being accused of witchcraft just for understanding physics.
Exactly. So Folk became the early model for the doomed captain. However, he is not the name that cemented the legend in the global public consciousness.
No, the famous name comes a bit later.
That milestone belongs to a publication in May of 1821 in Blackwood's Edinburgh magazine. This account introduces the name Captain Hendrick van Decken.
I really want to reconstruct this fateful voyage based on the 1821 text because it reads like a thriller.
It is incredibly dramatic.
The magazine frames it as an Amsterdam vessel that sailed 70 years prior. Decken is described as a staunch, incredibly skilled seaman, but his fatal flaw is absolute, unyielding arrogance.
Hubris in its purest form.
The text actually states he would have his own way in spite of the devil.
He is a man defined by a pathological stubbornness, completely unaccustomed to nature dictating terms to him.
And the disaster unfolds minute by minute. They are trying to double the Cape, aiming for the safety of Table Bay. It is a brutal, day-long physical struggle against the elements.
The wind is just hammering them.
The wind is heading them, violently pushing the heavy fluid back, rejecting their advance over and over. You can picture Decken, this hardened, arrogant commander, pacing the violently pitching wooden deck.
Totally soaked to the bone, freezing.
And he is screaming curses not at his crew, but at the wind itself. He is attempting to bully the atmosphere.
It represents an active, physical battle of wills between one man's ego and the entire planetary weather system.
And then just after sunset, in the fading stormy light, a passing vessel manages to hail him.
Another ship gets close enough to shout over.
Right. They ask Decken a completely logical question. Do you not mean to go into the bay that night? They are offering him an out.
They are telling him to drop anchor, to seek shelter, to admit that the storm has won the day.
And the refusal of that offer is the exact moment the curse locks in.
It is the turning point of the entire legend.
Decken yells back across the waves, "May I be eternally damned if I do, though I should beat about here till the day of judgment."
Till the day of judgment. Analyzing this thematically, it is the zenith of maritime hubris. It is humanity declaring open war on the environment.
And he loses.
Decken genuinely believes his willpower can override the physical forces of the ocean. And the ocean's terrifying, almost mocking response is to grant him exactly what he requested.
You demand to beat against the wind forever. The ocean says, granted.
Be careful what you wish for.
He curses himself through his own refusal to yield.
The text concludes that he never did go into that bay and continues to beat about those seas still, forever accompanied by foul weather. The captain becomes an eternal monument to the folly of arrogance.
The narrative of Decken is incredibly evocative. But up to this point in our investigation, we are analyzing folklore.
Yes, mostly word of mouth and magazines.
We are dissecting magazine stories, anonymous sailor superstitions, and the psychological trauma of the 18th century. But this is where this deep dive takes a massive, chilling pivot.
Because the historical record changes drastically here.
It transitions from campfire stories to a fully documented, chillingly credible sighting by highly trained observers.
We are moving our timeline forward to July 11th, 1881.
I want to break down this incident with the rigor of a true crime investigation because the data points here are staggering.
It is the most well-documented sighting in history.
The location is off the coast of Australia, between Melbourne and Sydney. The witnesses comprise 13 people. But these aren't isolated, malnourished sailors dying of scurvy in the 1600s.
Not at all.
These are 13 highly trained military men aboard a 4,000-ton British Royal Navy iron-hulled corvette, the HMS Inconstant.
A very modern, disciplined ship for its time.
And among those witnesses is Prince George of Wales.
The young man who would eventually be crowned King George V of the United Kingdom.
A literal future king is logging this.
He was a teenager at the time on a 3-year naval voyage with his older brother and their tutor. They were temporarily stationed on the Inconstant while their primary ship, the Bacchante, was having its rudder repaired. And it is the prince's own official published log that records the entire event.
Let's construct the timeline. Starting at 4 a.m., it is the pre-dawn watch.
The darkest, coldest, most psychologically taxing part of the night.
But the log explicitly notes that the sea is calm and the night is clear. This isn't a stormy delusion. Suddenly, a strange red light cuts across the water. The log describes it as a phantom ship, all aglow.
And we need to pay very close attention to the proximity recorded in the royal log.
How close was it?
It states that in the midst of this glowing red light, the masts, spars, and sails of a brig stood out in strong relief at a distance of only 200 yards.
200 yards. In the context of the open ocean, that is point-blank range.
It is practically on top of them.
That is close enough to see the texture of the timber, the tautness of the rigging, the exact cut of the sails. And this isn't a single sleep-deprived midshipman seeing things.
No, the log explicitly states that the officer of the watch from the bridge saw it clearly.
And the quarterdeck midshipman was immediately dispatched to investigate.
The rigid military chain of command validates the sighting in real time. Multiple officers are independently observing a glowing red ship occupying physical space right off their bow.
So the midshipman rushes forward to the forecastle, the front of the ship, to hail them or prepare for evasive maneuvers, because they are about to collide, right?
That is the fear, yes.
But the log details a disappearance that breaks the fundamental laws of physics. The midshipman arrives at the front of the ship, looks out, and nothing.
Completely gone.
The text reads, "There is no vestige, nor any sign whatever of any material ship was to be seen either near or right away to the horizon."
Complete. Absolute void. 13 sober, military-trained men tracked a glowing ship 200 yards away, and seconds later, in clear weather on a calm sea with unobstructed visibility, it vanished without a ripple.
How does a human mind process that?
From a psychological standpoint, that sudden nothingness is infinitely more terrifying than the presence of the ship. It tells your brain that reality itself is no longer trustworthy.
And reality violently fractured a few hours later for one man in particular, because the log entry doesn't end with the disappearance.
The tragedy strikes later that morning.
Fast forward to 10:45 a.m., roughly 6 hours after the sighting. The sun is up, it is daylight. The ordinary seaman who had been the very first person to spot and report the ghost ship at 4 a.m. is up in the rigging.
He's working on the foretopmast crosstrees.
On a ship like the Inconstant, we're talking about a height of roughly 70 to 80 feet above the solid oak deck.
It is a massive drop.
He loses his footing, plummets to the forecastle, and the royal log uses a phrase that is utterly brutal. It says he was smashed to atoms.
Smashed to atoms. That is a visceral, uncompromising description of catastrophic, blunt force trauma.
It's an incredibly shocking phrase to read in a sterile naval log. It feels so emotional. So we have to pause and investigate cause and effect here. We have a verified ghost ship sighting, and 6 hours later, the man who sounded the alarm dies a horrific death. How do we parse this?
It forces a profound debate on how humans process trauma and assign meaning to tragedy. Did the curse of the Flying Dutchman reach out and physically throw that sailor from the crosstrees?
Does the ghost kill him?
Right. Or, viewing it through the lens of human psychology and workplace safety, was that sailor so deeply traumatized by what he believed he saw at 4 a.m. that he was fundamentally compromised?
He couldn't focus on his job.
Was his mind replaying that glowing red void, causing him to lose his focus, misjudge his grip on the rigging, and suffer a fatal workplace accident?
I lean heavily toward the psychological explanation. He was distracted by pure terror. You don't just shake off seeing a glowing phantom ship.
Your adrenaline is crashing. You are exhausted.
But the crew, already steeped in centuries of maritime folklore, immediately connects the two events. They retrospectively assign supernatural malice to an accident caused by psychological distress.
The legend becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
If you truly believe you've just seen the ultimate harbinger of doom, your own ensuing panic might just be the exact mechanism that kills you.
The mind manufactures the doom it expects. You expect to die, so you make a fatal mistake.
But analyzing the psychology of the fall still leaves us with a massive, glaring physical mystery.
The sighting itself.
Yes. If we strip away the superstition, the curses, and the folklore, how did 13 rational military men, including a future king, see a glowing red ship 200 yards away on a clear night? We have to rationalize the impossible.
It is the biggest question of the case.
I am desperate to understand the physics here, because I can buy the idea of mass hallucination during a storm where you can't see your own hand in front of your face. But on a clear night, with multiple officers corroborating the exact layout of the masts, how does the atmosphere build a ghost ship out of thin air?
The scientific treatises provided in our sources point to one highly credible, documented explanation: complex atmospheric optical illusions.
What are we talking about here?
We are looking at phenomena known scientifically as superior mirages, looming, and specifically the Fata Morgana.
Okay, I need a deep dive into the actual mechanics of this. Because I know what a mirage looks like on a hot highway, but a whole ship. What is happening to the air to cause this?
It is entirely dependent on the bending of light across varying temperatures. Normally, as you know, air temperature decreases the higher you go up in the atmosphere.
Right, it gets colder as you climb a mountain.
But under specific meteorological conditions, typically when a dense layer of very cold air is trapped directly on the surface of the ocean, with a layer of significantly warmer air sitting on top of it, you create what is called a thermal inversion.
So you have a cold blanket of heavy air right on the water, and a warm, lighter ceiling pressing down on it.
Correct. And because cold air is denser than warm air, it has a different refractive index. It bends light differently.
Okay, I'm following.
When the light ray is reflecting off a physical, completely normal ship located miles away, perhaps so far away, it is physically hidden behind the curvature of the Earth.
Wait, so the real ship isn't even in their line of sight?
Exactly, it is over the horizon. But when the light from that hidden ship hits that thermal inversion, the rays don't travel in a straight line. The boundary between the cold and warm air acts as a massive atmospheric lens, bending the light rays in a downward arc over the curve of the planet.
So nature is essentially creating a temporary fiber optic cable out of the atmosphere.
That is a perfect analogy.
The temperature layers trap the image of the distant ship and pipe it directly into the eyeballs of the sailors on the inconstant.
The atmosphere captures the light from a ship hidden below the horizon and projects a perfect, often highly magnified hologram of it suspended in the air.
But wait, the Royal Navy log specifically noted a strange red light. A mirage is just a reflection of a normal wooden ship. Where is the glowing red light coming from? Does the physics account for that, or is that proof the sailors were embellishing the story?
The physics absolutely accounts for it. It involves a process called Rayleigh scattering.
Rayleigh scattering.
It is the exact same atmospheric mechanism that makes a sunset appear red. Because the light from the distant ship has to travel through miles of the dense, low-level marine atmosphere to reach the observer, the shorter wavelengths of light, the blues and greens, are scattered away by moisture and particulates in the air.
Oh, wow. So only the red light survives the trip.
Only the longer red wavelengths manage to penetrate the inversion layer over that distance. Furthermore, if the distant ship was carrying lanterns, which they would be at 4 a.m., that localized light source is magnified, color-shifted, and projected by the mirage.
Resulting in the terrifying illusion of a phantom vessel glowing with the fires of hell.
Exactly. The atmosphere strips away the blue light and just leaves this glowing red coal of an image.
That is incredibly eerie. So the atmosphere acts as a giant, distorted, color-shifting projector.
Yeah.
But does it always project a perfect image?
Not at all. Which adds another layer of weirdness to the phenomenon. Because of how the light refracts through the varying densities of the inversion, these superior mirages are very often reversed.
Reversed, like backwards.
No, upside down. A sailor might look up and see a ship sailing completely upside down in the sky.
That would break my brain.
However, the sources note that they can sometimes appear upright, creating a flawless, highly detailed illusion of a phantom vessel gliding effortlessly just above the crests of the waves. Another related effect, called looming, can take a ship sitting just below the horizon and make it appear artificially hoisted straight up into the air, making it seem much closer than it actually is.
So we have the scientific mechanism. We can completely demystify the HMS inconstant sighting. 13 men saw the atmospherically magnified, red-shifted light of a real ship located miles over the horizon.
And they saw it perfectly clearly because the air was calm.
Right. And when the thermal inversion broke, when a breeze finally mixed the warm and cold air together, the fiber optic cable snapped, the projector turned off, and the mirage vanished instantly into the void.
The science is pristine. It explains every detail. But here's the critical analytical point we must not overlook.
What's that?
Understanding the physics of a thermal inversion today does absolutely nothing to negate the pants-wetting, paralyzing terror of the historical experience.
No. If anything, knowing that the environment can literally weaponize your own vision against you makes it scarier.
Push your empathy back to the 18th century. Imagine being a sailor completely ignorant of atmospheric refraction or Rayleigh scattering. Your entire understanding of reality is constructed from wood, wind, and deeply ingrained religious superstition.
You believe in demons. You believe in curses.
You are standing on a dark deck, freezing, miles from home, and you watch a ship sail silently through the sky, glowing blood red or gliding upside down above the clouds.
You would lose your mind. Your brain would have no existing file folder to put that information into. You would have no logical choice but to believe that the gates of hell had cracked open and the damned had come for you.
The scientific truth doesn't make the Flying Dutchman less frightening. It proves just how incredibly fragile and vulnerable human perception is. In the profound isolation of the sea, your own eyes will lie to you in the most spectacular, terrifying ways imaginable.
And that profound psychological impact, the fact that the atmosphere was repeatedly generating these horrifying holograms, is exactly why the Flying Dutchman refused to stay buried in the logbooks of dead sailors.
It broke containment.
It really did. It left a massive, indelible footprint on global culture.
It transitioned from a specific, localized maritime warning about the Cape of Good Hope into a universal, culturally transcendent symbol of endless wandering, human hubris, and eternal damnation.
Let's trace that cultural aftermath,
Hmm.
because we have to ask, why does this specific nightmare endure? Why do we care about a 17th century Dutch ghost ship in the modern era?
Well, we can track its echoes throughout literary history. It heavily influenced Samuel Taylor Coleridge's famous 1798 poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which features a cursed mariner, an albatross, and a ghostly ship representing the heavy burden of sin.
Classic piece of literature.
But it also evolved into modern existential metaphors. In 1951, author Ward Moore wrote a story titled Flying Dutchman. He stripped away the ocean entirely.
How does he do the story without the ocean?
He used the myth as a chilling metaphor for an automated bomber plane, flying its patrol routes eternally over an Earth where humanity had long since totally annihilated itself in a global nuclear war.
Oh man, that is incredibly bleak. The curse outlives the human race.
Mhm.
It becomes a monument to our ultimate destructive hubris.
It is a brilliant, terrifying update to the myth.
But arguably, the most famous artistic adaptation, the one that really cemented its romantic tragedy into the bedrock of Western art, comes from the world of opera.
Yes, Richard Wagner's 1843 opera, The Flying Dutchman. But to truly understand Wagner's interpretation, we have to examine his primary inspiration, which came from a satirical novel written by Heinrich Heine in 1833.
Heine changed the lore, right?
He did. Heine took the magazine stories of the endless storm and the macabre dead letters, and he introduced a profoundly tragic new concept, a loophole in the curse, the possibility of salvation.
How did the loophole work?
Heine introduced the idea that the captain was allowed to step onto dry land once every 7 years.
Just one day every 7 years.
Right. And during that brief, fleeting window, he had to seek out a faithful wife. If he could find a woman whose devotion to him was absolute, her pure love would break the curse and release him from his endless wandering.
It fundamentally altered the narrative from a story of straightforward, arrogant punishment into a desperate, doomed quest for redemption.
Wagner took this concept, shifted the setting to a raging storm in the North Sea, and composed a masterpiece of tragic, driving obsession.
It humanizes the monster. You start to feel bad for him. But from the high art tragedy of Wagnerian opera, the legend eventually trickles down into, well, everywhere.
It becomes ubiquitous.
The bizarrely diverse modern adaptations are a testament to how far this ghost has traveled from the treacherous waters of the Cape. Over the last century, we have systematically sterilized the terror into pop culture entertainment.
The list of adaptations is exhaustive and, frankly, structurally fascinating.
It really is.
Yeah.
You have the literal blockbuster interpretation in the Pirates of the Caribbean film franchise, where the Flying Dutchman is captained by Davy Jones. He's this squid-faced, barnacle-encrusted monster who, borrowing heavily from Wagner's operatic loophole, can only step on land once every 10 years.
The visual of that ship rising out of the water is iconic.
And you have the legend appearing in the Twilight Zone, where a doomed World War II U-boat captain is cursed to forever relive his own sinking aboard a phantom passenger ship.
And it scales all the way down to the most sanitized forms of children's media.
Exactly. There is literally a glowing green, complaining pirate ghost named the Flying Dutchman in SpongeBob SquarePants.
That is quite the leap.
Think about the incredible trajectory of that idea, from actual military men dying of fright and falling from riggings in the 1800s to a cartoon sponge stealing a ghost's dining sock.
It is absurd when you put it like that.
And it's not just media. There's a water coaster at the Efteling amusement park in the Netherlands called De Vliegende Hollander. KLM Royal Dutch Airlines used to paint the Flying Dutchman in massive letters on the side of all their commercial aircraft.
The moniker is deeply ingrained in the sports world, too. American baseball legend Johannes Peter Honus Wagner was nicknamed the Flying Dutchman because of his sheer speed on the field. Current Dutch Formula One world champion Max Verstappen carries the moniker today.
So as an expert analyzing human behavior, I want your take on this. Why do we do this? Why do we take the ultimate terrifying symbol of oceanic doom, a literal harbinger of death and isolation, and turn it into water rides, airline logos, and sports nicknames?
From a psychological standpoint, it is a highly effective cultural coping mechanism. It is grounded in terror management theory.
Terror management, like how we deal with the fear of death.
Exactly. It is how humanity domesticates its monsters. By taking the terrifying, uncontrollable, lethal power of the untamable sea and shrinking it down into a mascot. into a predictable, consumable piece of entertainment. We attempt to conquer our innate evolutionary fear of it.
We make it small so it can't hurt us.
We mock what we fear to strip it of its power. We take the teeth out of the nightmare so we can sleep in our warm beds at night. If the Flying Dutchman is just a roller coaster, then the ocean isn't a churning graveyard waiting to swallow us, it's just a playground.
But the truth, the historical reality we've uncovered in these logs and journals today, is that the ocean is absolutely no playground. It is a crushing, blind, indifferent force. And that brings us to our final synthesis.
We need to pull the perspective back.
I will pull you back from the amusement parks, away from the movie screens, and place you right back on those creaking, rotting wooden decks from the very beginning of our journey.
We have charted a complex, harrowing course today. We started with the immense, bloody scale of the VOC's golden age, exploring a corporate shadow empire where human life was an expendable resource in the pursuit of profit.
We track the physical and psychological contagion of fear, examining how extreme malnutrition, isolation, and a story of a lost ship mutated through the claustrophobia of sailor superstition.
Mutated into a massive tale of collective guilt, piracy, and the horrors of the slave trade.
We watched Captain Decken pace his deck, screaming his arrogant hubris at the wind, begging the universe for eternal damnation rather than admitting a single defeat to nature.
We broke down the chilling 1881 royal encounter, where 13 sober military men watched a glowing ship vanish into the void, resulting in a traumatized sailor plummeting 80 feet to be smashed to atoms.
And we dissected the mind-bending physical reality of the Fata Morgana, the atmosphere literally building fiber optic cables to project holographic horrors onto the clouds.
We observed how the very real tragedy of a crew trapped in an endless void evolved into an immortal cultural icon.
But why should you care today? Why does the Flying Dutchman matter to someone listening in the safety of the 21st century?
Because the themes are universal.
Because at its core, stripped of the ghosts and the curses, this legend is the ultimate manifestation of human burnout. It represents the modern fear of the endless, inescapable grind. It is the terror of total isolation, of constantly fighting a headwind that will not yield, and the deep, quiet dread that no matter how hard you fight, you will never, ever reach home.
It is a metaphor for struggling against forces vastly larger than yourself.
It forces us to respect the blind power of nature, and it serves as a stark reminder that our own minds, when pushed to the absolute brink of endurance, are capable of creating horrors far worse than anything hiding in the dark.
We've spent our time today dissecting the physics of mirages and the frayed psychology of exhausted sailors. We can scientifically explain away the bending of light. We can track the pathological contagion of paranoia. We can rationalize the impossible.
But there is always that lingering doubt.
I want to leave you with a final haunting thought to mull over. If you were actually standing on the slanted deck of a ship at 4 a.m., hundreds of miles from the nearest human settlement, with freezing water lashing your face and the wood groaning beneath your feet,
In the absolute pitch black.
and a glowing red galleon appeared out of the fog, sailing silently against hurricane winds, would you really trust your textbook knowledge of atmospheric refraction? Or would you fall to your knees knowing the ocean has finally come to collect its due?